Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Abilene People, the podcast here on KTAB Plus on your streaming device or on bigcountryhomepage.com, where we talk to Abilene's most interesting people. And today, it's not our first repeat guest, but it's the first guest I invited back for a repeat appearance on Abilene People, and it's taken this long to get him back in the digital studio. Former Mayor of Abilene, Anthony Williams. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing well and glad to be here today, and thanks for the invitation.
You are one of Abilene's most interesting people. There's no question about it. And I want to start with something that's going to really get you going. You ready?
I'm ready.
Here we go. So Jay Stearns of Jay's Barbecue, he tells me that he cooks his briskets 24 hours and never gets them above 180 degrees. And I couldn't believe it. I said, are you kidding me? So I tried that technique. I've tried it twice now, and I'm telling you, beautiful results. Have you ever heard of that or ever tried it?
Tried that, and also I met a gentleman that does fast cook, and so I love to smoke, and so I think Jay's Barbecue is just outstanding. There's two places in town I would pay for barbecue, and Jay's definitely one of them.
Yeah.
So
All right, good. Well, you are the expert on smoking barbecue, smoking brisket. Yeah.
Well, I like to think so. Definitely expert on eating brisket.
Hey, man, I could challenge you there. So I do think it would be fun sometime, though, to seriously see about some kind of event where you get to show off how good you are. I think it'd be fun.
Love that.
Yeah, I'd love that too. We'll work on that.
Maybe slide in some 42 at the same time.
Oh, now. It's been a long time since I played 42. Okay, so you, in addition to so many hats that you have worn, you have, of course, worked at the highest levels of administration at Abilene Christian University. You worked at the highest level of political office and administration in our city, the mayor. You were a city councilman. You also have served as the vice chair of the Taylor County GOP organization. Is that right?
And I did that before I became a city councilman, so that was many years ago.
But speaking of many years ago, I'm assuming you'd agree that the politics has changed a lot. I mean, the conservative Republican Party that I started being a part of and voting with since Ronald Reagan, because that shows you how old I am. It's I don't know that it no longer exists, but if nothing else, it's just fragments of it that exist.
Well, and for me, it's very disappointing. When I served as the VP of a local party years ago, I mean, it was tough on both sides for me. I can talk about what that looked like then, but I believe in what we're saying, and I know it's kind of a cliche and maybe even antiquated to some extent, but I love when we talked about the moral majority. It resonated with me. It meant something to me. And those early days when we served here locally and did regional things, you had groups of people that love this country, loves the aspirations of this country, and were really about providing opportunities, in my mind, I thought, of having that formalized and serving in governmental roles.
So what's happened? Because when we talk about even the term moral majority today, it's been so politicized. Somebody asked me recently, would you lose a friend over politics? And my answer was no, but I have lost friends over morality, over ethics. Yeah. And it seems to me that's a way to get there. I don't know if it is for you. What's happened? What's the change?
And I think, and even though I was partisan, years ago, but I never chose party before country. I never looked at an individual and let that displace my own set of values. And we're in a place now, I think both things are occurring. We have the majority of, in my opinion, our countrymen that are allowing themselves towards a party. And you think about those implications of what that means, how counter that is to, I believe, what we are. And then just individuals being more important, than the whole. I think I served well as mayor and a councilman, but the significance was not in me individual. It was the collective. It was the team. I think that's part of what makes America America, that we look at these larger ideals and try to make application. And I think that over the last several years, that we've lost our way in that regard.
You know, it's interesting that that's where you headed, because I went back in time, which the internet allows us to do, and found an article in the Texas Standard where you had been interviewed prior to being elected mayor. And I'd like to just read a brief quote, if I could. Williams will be Abilene's first African-American mayor in the city's 136-year history. Of course, now we're older, but you were the first black mayor. And here's a quote from Anthony Williams. Just like other Texans, I'm proud to be a Texan. As an African-American, I'm proud of my heritage, but I really want to focus more broadly on our community. Your brand was bringing people together.
Yes.
And it could be liberal, could be conservative, could be white, could be black, could be Latino. That's your brand, bringing people together. And I think that we need more of that. So why the heck aren't you running for office, sir?
Well, I think, my time is over, and I still receive phone calls from national and regional, state officials, but my love has always been for the local community. And just because of the aforementioned issues I see with the Republican Party, I just don't want to put myself in that role. As the older I've become, I'm really more laser focused on what I think God wants me to do, and try and do the best I can and make that happen.
So recently we've had three, one very local, one a little bit larger than just local in our district for the state, and then one in our congressional district for the nation. Three have said, I'm not going to run again. Brian Yates at City Council, and then Stan Lambert for District 71 State House, and then Jodey Arrington, our congressman.
Also, Blaze Reagan. Local.
Well, and Blaze is no. Well, I know he stepped out of the race for the District 71 state rep. Is he also going to step out of City Council?
Yeah, I believe the deadline was this past week,
Okay.
and he did
No file. All right. Well, it would be unusual for a former mayor to say, you know what, I'll put the councilman hat back on. Yeah. And I wouldn't necessarily expect that, although I think you're the servant-hearted guy that could and would do it. But I think there were people locally disappointed not to see your name in when Arrington announced, or not to see your name in when Stan Lambert announced, Congressman Arrington, I should say. But when Representative Lambert announced, we didn't see your name. So you really are out of it? Or could we get you to say something today to give us hope?
No, I really don't have any desire at this point to seek local office. And you never say never, but it would be an extraordinary circumstances that would make me pivot and change my mind. I do have interest in working with other would-be local officials, even statewide, assisting them. I think, and I'm biased, but I think the most important government is local government. And I want to see women and men of high moral character run and serve, and would love to be a part of that conversation. But I just can't see myself running again. And I enjoyed serving. I enjoyed being mayor of Abilene, enjoying being a council member, but I just can't see a way forward in that regard.
So I want to take just a real quick side tour into that idea that you enjoyed being mayor. When you were mayor, I was, and I think the same thing of our current mayor, Mayor Weldon Hurt. I was amazed at how many functions you had to attend. You had to. That was part of the job. Yes. Had to be exhausting at some level. That part of it, I would assume you don't miss. But a lot of it, you've got to miss because of your personality and how you're wired. Speak to that, sir.
Well, I mean, look, Abilene's my hometown. I mean, I love this community. I want us to win. And I enjoy being part of the conversation, and in some situations leading a conversation about things that will allow Abilene to be better. And we were successful. Undeniably, we've done some things when I was mayor and councilman that were extraordinary, that really is kind of the foundation for the things that are occurring right now. And so, look, I take pride in that, being part of the team and the leader who led some of those efforts. And so I enjoy that part. Enjoy parades, love parades. Now, the chicken dinners and those events, maybe not so much, because there's an expectation. So I can't think of a week where I didn't go to a lunch or a dinner at least once, twice a week. every single week. And at those events, you're the mayor, so you have to be engaged. And so, that's tough, but I enjoy my time as mayor.
Yeah, you never got to flip the switch off like we get to do as just citizens, because as mayor you can't. And you did the spade work for, you really did prepare the garden for what we're seeing with the data centers, with the cheese factory, with Bass Pro Shop. And I would dare say the development, Allen Ridge at Abilene Christian, I would assume you had your hands in that dough. And then in turn, what's happening
Water
at the
security
rehab.
for Possum Kingdom in far west Texas. Talk about economic development, in a 6-year term, we had more private sector investment via the DCOA during that time period than the previous almost 30 years.
And what do you say to the people? Not that this is that big of an issue any longer, or at least I don't hear it much anymore, but I heard it in the past. I'm sure you've heard it. The criticism about the DCOA. Why are we paying tax dollars to all this? What do you say to those folks?
Well, if you look at just playing ball in Texas, almost every community has a development corporation. So we're competing against those communities. And we have to put our best foot forward. I can look back at my tenure as a councilman. The DCOA didn't always win. We didn't always have great leadership. But if you look what we've done with the DCOA, Misty Mayo, her team, they have created opportunities that if not for them, we wouldn't have that opportunity. And that will be the residue of what they're doing right now. We will see for years to come and benefit the future, I believe.
Yeah, when I was a little kid, I lived in a small town, outside of a small town in Kentucky, and the big industries there were farming, tobacco farming specifically, a lot of corn, dairy, and popcorn. And there was a massive popcorn company right there in our town. And I remember even as a kid realizing there's a lot of people that work there, and that's a big deal to have places where a lot of people work in your community. And so hats off, sir. You contributed a lot to that. Oh, I want to go back into the politics. And I want to go back kind of into some of the stuff that has to make you uncomfortable. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a question about President Trump's tweeting of a image of our first African-American president and first lady pictured as primates. Yeah. And I want you to wear your I want everybody to come together hat. I want you to wear your former GOP vice chair hat. I want you to wear your I'm disappointed sometimes in where things are going hat, as well as a lot of hats. But I guess let me just get there. What in the world?
Well, so let me say this, just to amplify some things. I'm a conservative. Look, for the last almost 30 years, I can't think of a primary I've not participated in or candidates I did not support, blocks that I've walked campaigning for candidates of the Republican Party. And so, but that aside, some things ought not be partisan. We ought to be able to look and say, that is not right. If you look at the demeaning of the humanity of individuals, the dehumanization, the process of creating a scenario where someone is less than. I'm from a generation, we know the comparison with primates and African Americans. We know what that looks like. We know the origins of that. That is demeaning. Now, as an almost 60-year-old man, I can process that in a way. What about that young little girl or little boy who's trying to find out who and what they are and their value in society? To see them, that we ought to be able to, that is wrong. And it shouldn't have to be political. There ought to be things that we as Americans look at our leaders and say, that's not acceptable. And I have a conversation. I'm disappointed by some of the rhetoric, really on both sides, but I just think that we can do better. And Mama would say, when you know to do better, just be better.
Do you wish more local conservative officials and politicians would say what you just said? Because it was, look, transparency, I sure wish so.
Yeah. Well, and I would say I wish more people. I don't, because I don't want to make this political. I wish more people, when they saw something that wasn't right, that was offensive, that the collective communicated that. If we're ever going to move forward, if we're ever going to be unified, if we're ever going to be to live out the aspiration of this country, the majority of us need to define what's acceptable and what is not, and then hold people accountable.
And it seems to me that it's okay to say, I disagree. In fact, I'm offended. In fact, we can do better. In fact, let's all decide to do better, regardless of what anybody in the White House is saying or doing. And that's important.
Yeah. And I guess it defines, what is your allegiance to? And our children are looking at us. They're taking cues from us. And I do care what others think about me, but I care most what those close to me think. And I think that's a message or a theme all of us should adapt. I mean, there's certain things that we ought not to debate. And that is one thing that's been the most disappointing.
There's just so much to talk about regarding ethics and morality in our politics today. And again, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, because it's just everywhere in the news and everywhere in our social media feeds. Surely we can all agree that the sickness and the depravity that we're seeing exposed in the ongoing release of the Epstein file material is just beyond disgusting. And some of it obviously is felonious. It's criminal. Yeah. What the heck? I mean, what is wrong with men?
And I think it is just the brokenness of man. It shows itself in our society. And as a believer, it just calls me to lean on the things I believe that are reason why I wake up in the morning, of really trying to live a life the best way I can, to be a type of man that I believe that God purposed me to be, and then use what influence I may have to encourage others to do the same.
Well, and you have the benefit of a genuine faith that informs you, and faith doesn't mean like absolute certainty about facts. It means absolute certainty in a trust, in a trusting relationship with a divine power. I learned that when I personally sought to recover from some really horrible habits I had. And to change my life, and prompted by my son's example to go through a recovery program. Yeah. And what they told me was, we are not impressed with your resume. We're not impressed with what you say. We want to be impressed by your commitment to let faith abide in you and let it flow from in you out. Yeah. That's kind of what you're saying, huh?
Yeah. The fragility of mankind is real. I have my struggles, you have your struggles, we all are striving. And what I would love to see more opportunities where we focus on really helping each other just be better, that will allow us as communities to be better. And taking time to identify those women and men that want to lead, and identify those who amplify those values, holding them accountable and applauding when they do things consistent with that expectation.
Back in the early 2020s, like 2021, I don't know about 2022, certainly 2023, I found examples of those were the days where immigrants, many with criminal records were being flown across the nation, and many of them right here to Abilene.
Yes.
They would land at the Abilene airport. You were mayor then.
Yes.
And you said famously something along the lines of, if it's immoral if you're flying immigrants into our city and they got no place to go.
Yes, yes.
They were having to go to Salvation Army or whatnot.
Yes. And in some situations, just being released into our community.
Yeah. And it's really unthinkable that was a federal policy. And, of course, I think that the Democrats and Joe Biden paid a price for that in the election, and Donald Trump ran largely on changing immigration. But I wonder if that didn't then inform additional policies that created the I don't know what to call it, but the scenes that we have observed in Minneapolis, where 2 people have been shot and killed by Border Patrol or ICE agents or DHS personnel. It's just what? Again, when I say what's wrong with men, what's going on?
And I'm on the record. I was offended by the Biden administration, the way they were handling immigration, releasing individuals unvetted in our community. That is unacceptable. And a total disregard for an opportunity to engage counties and cities across the country, and a disregard for an effort to secure our border. So I'm on record of communicating my displeasure and my anger in regards to what occurred in our own community. We look where we are now. I mean, there was a need for something to happen. The question is what we're doing now, is it going too far? Now, litigation needs to take place and investigations need to occur. But when I look at Alex Pretty and the facts that I know, what I know is what I've read. I'm not a criminal investigator. What I've read, the man ought not have lost his life. We can make arguments about his appropriateness of what he should not, but what he did should not have been a death sentence. And that's something that ought not be partisan. That ought to be, we ought to raise, look, people need to be held accountable.
I want to, and I'm stepping out a little bit on thin ice because I may not say it right and I may not remember it accurately, but I want to take us back again to Minneapolis, just blocks from where Renee Good, another person who was killed, and that's the George Floyd incident. And that was, I think you were probably mayor when that occurred. And I think you led us here in this community beautifully saying, look, there's no reason for, racial divide to become larger or bigger. We need to know our neighbors, I recall you saying. But I remember talking to somebody very, very close to me. I'll just keep it like that. Somebody very, very close to me, who made the comment that, well, George Floyd wouldn't have died if he had just obeyed the policeman's order. And, well, I'm not sure exactly how to pitch it back to you in the phrase of a question, so I'll just say something and ask you to respond. I think you can say that about a lot of things, but it's just substantially not true that he had to die either. And the guy was tried. There was investigation. There was adjudication, and that police officer is in prison today. My point is, it seems awfully easy for people who disagree with immigration policy or white people that don't trust a black man to say something like that, and they think it's settled. But it's a lot deeper than that. Yeah. A lot deeper than that.
Well, I think fundamentally, I value life. I value life from inception into the grave. I've said that publicly. And I think this community has put value on life. Where does that stop? At 20, 30, 40? Where does it stop? If we're going to say that we value life, everything we do needs congruent to that end. Or, George Floyd having drugs in the system, him not complying, all those things may be accurate. The question is, if we indeed value life, what he faced, was that a death sentence? Is that recompense? And again, I don't, some of my very best friends have served in law enforcement. and respect those men and women for what they do, often putting in situations where they have microseconds to respond. And they're human to make mistakes. And so I incorporate all those into my thinking. But if we're going to say that we value life, then let's value life. Whether that is white, black, polka dot, male, female, young, old, let's value life. And the ideals of what this country is we imagine this country to be.
You know, I can't imagine that any Abilene police officer would ever put their knee on a man's neck like happened in that case. I'm so thankful that we live in a place where I can't imagine that.
Yeah. And look, I'm biased, but something very, very special about Abilene. You mentioned the George Floyd killing when that occurred. And I remember going to a rally, and it was response to the killing. And at the time, our white police chief was leading the rally.
In fact, it ended, if I recall, the march that I participated in ended in the parking lot at the police station.
That was the second one. It was two. But if you think about what other community in this country
there you go.
would have the white police chief leading an effort in our civil rights. And so that's why I hope in our community. That's why we can be different. We talk about the Abilene difference. What is the Abilene difference? You know, I enjoyed serving, and I've said this before. I embrace my heritage. I know what me being elected has meant to some people in the community. But in my races, excuse the pun, race never was a significant factor. And if you look back on who voted for me, you look at percentiles, I mean, which tells me that in this community, we can get beyond some things others can't. And that should be our motivation. We ought to be looking at things we can do right now in our community, and all of us make our contribution, how we can make Abilene better. And not focus with elsewhere, focus on here and being better.
When you were first elected mayor, did you have older family members alive at that time? Maybe they're still alive, like a grandparent or something?
I had my grandmother come to my swearing in, and her father, my great-grandfather, John Cravens, was a guy who lived in Jones County who woke up to a cross burning in his yard, who was discouraged to vote and participate. One reason why, as a family, we vote because of his example. And we had a conversation about how proud he would be at this moment and what it really represented. And so, I mean, I get to age now where I do more time just reflecting and thinking about, realize my own mortality, you know, knowing that on this side of eternity, I've lived more than I'm going to live. And so I get a little more sentimental.
Yeah, you and I both, we got more life in our rearview mirror than we do out the front windshield.
That's accurate. That's accurate. Okay. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, you know, we got to either, well, you have choices. You know, we can be at peace with it or not. Yeah. I'd rather be at peace with it. So as we wind down, I want to get back to local politics, and because you said, you know, you love local first.
Yes.
And I think that is where the strength of our country is, really. It's in the local election. You were on the podcast a few months ago after Miguel Espinoza had defeated longtime serving Councilman Kyle McAllister in a runoff. And after the podcast, you made a comment to me, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. If I've got it wrong, just tell me. But I think you said something along the lines of, man, I see some dynamics in that runoff election that tell me change is coming, or something to that effect. I don't want to characterize it. I'll let you characterize it. Do you remember something like that?
Well, I don't be too dramatic because I could be sometimes. But that race, if you think that represented for an incumbent, and by the way, any woman or man who has served as long as Kyle has served should be thanked for his service.
Absolutely, 100%.
But for an incumbent, in a runoff to get beat as decisively as occurred just says something. I have great hopes for Miguel. I hope that he will continue to serve well. I think he's serving well now. But I think this community, in my opinion, is really looking for a different type of leader and mindset. Maybe that's the youth of Miguel. Maybe some ideas, some freshness that he brings. But I think when a race occurs like that, we should all take note and try to make determination of why that occurred. I think, again, I want Miguel to do well, and we have upcoming race. I want them to do well. I think place 4 is a very interesting race, for the city council. What would that look like? But I do think that it's noteworthy to go back and just pay attention to the results of that race.
Another thing that happens in local politics that I would love your counsel and advice, and I don't know if you've thought much about that, but I think that's a very valuable role that you play for our community. Look, I'm older than you, okay, but I think I can say, as an older statesman, as an older person, your vibe, your ethos is, here's a good word, here's some counsel. When we see people complain after complaint after complaint again about something like books in schools, what is your thought process? And I guess maybe I'll just characterize my thought process and let you respond to it. I just wish they would realize that it looking for the best is awfully important, but characterizing the worst is not always the pathway there.
There's been very passionate conversations about books, not just in Abilene, but statewide and really nationwide. You look at the gubernatorial race in Virginia just, a few years ago, how significant that played. And so I never want to dismiss someone's passion. Passion is fueled by caring and the concern that some have about what kiddos are absorbing. I think we should be aware of that. At the same time, I do think that those who have raised their hand to serve have to look at both sides, survey the community, and represent the whole community. It's always dangerous if a portion of the community has more influence than what's best for the whole community. And it's tough. Like you and others, I read and pay attention and watch newscasts about the whole conversation. But that is a microcosm of the need for having high-quality elected officials to be able to look at something that is very passionate by a group, but to make sure that that passion of the group does not override the silent majority.
So let's see how much you really want Abilene to come together, sir. You're a North Side guy. You're a North Side guy.
I am.
You're always root for Abilene High. Never Cooper. God forbid Wiley.
Look, if Cooper is not played Abilene High, I'm a Cooper fan.
Well said. Well said. All right. So what do you think about Abilene the next 10 or 15 years? You think Abilene can continue to manage its growth? You think we'll be okay?
Well, you look at, Texas is one of the leading states in regards to AI technology. And you think about 25% of all AI technology in the Abilene area. It's pretty significant. Exceeding now over $30 billion will be invested in Abilene, in this area, in the next 10 years. That's significant. And so city leaders, really, and county leaders need to be really thinking in a forward sense to be sure we manage that. I have some personal thoughts about that 1,000-unit RV park that was approved by my former colleagues, but I'll leave that there.
Oh, but maybe that's the third trip into the podcast.
But I just think just being mindful. I mean, there's pressure. There's pressure of having adequate housing, and that's affecting those most vulnerable in our community. And so as a city, what does that look like? A city needs to facilitate conversations. We're not the private sector. We shouldn't act that way. But things that we could do as a vision for the community that will help, that will benefit citizens in Abilene.
Yeah. My wife was talking with a young lady that just graduated Hardin-Simmons. She's working here in town, and she's thinking about leaving Abilene because her rent is just so high. Of course, what's driving up the rent? Availability.
That's right.
And so it's a real issue, a real concern.
I think I don't know if it was an email or a conversation I had with a realtor, but talked about in a 1-year term how rent is increased by 40%. That is outrageous.
And the people that cannot afford that are the people at risk, the people on the market.
Yes.
They just can't afford. And even some people who wouldn't consider themselves at risk, but they have a modest income and they're doing okay, but all of a sudden they got a 40% increase in rent.
That's right. And even I was talking to a gentleman that lived in Stanford and talked about some growth in that community, 1,000 jobs in Stanford of a community of less than 2,000. I mean, and so I think if you look at the big picture, the growth is significant and benefits, but it does have consequences. And so city and community leaders leaning into that and looking out for what's best for our community is important.
All right, let's end where we began with brisket, okay? So I know that you're old school. I know that you don't consider pellet smokers, they're an abomination. I get it. I know. But I've got a small...
It may affect your salvation.
It may. I'm glad to hear you say that. I thought it was pretty certain. But I got a small yard. I don't have room for a big smoker. So what's your favorite wood?
Well, for brisket and red meats, love mesquite, love tasting mesquites.
What about pecan?
I love pecan with a chicken or a pork, some of the white meats. I think mesquite sometimes, the musk of mesquite could be overwhelming to a piece of white meat. And so I love mesquite with grilling my steak or smoking my brisket, but I prefer post oak actually, for pork and maybe pecan for chicken.
So do you do dry rub or do you do a wet marinade for your briskets and for your other meats?
So dry, but I spritz my brisket.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and when do you spritz it? Before, during?
During. So I fat side up. Try to smoke my brisket at ambient temperature of around 250, 275. When it gets internal temperature around 160, I wrap. I use foil. My friends use paper.
Yeah,
either or.
Foil is just easier for me.
You can cheat a little bit with foil. Jay uses paper. When it gets around 200, I set aside. And for best results, letting the rest, as long as the smoke was, gives you better brisket.
And do you rest it at what temp?
I throw mine to a cooler, and I just wait for it.
Sit. Yeah, and that's genius. Okay. All right, so when you're cooking for the city, that's what we need to line up. Yeah, that's what we need to line up.
We ought to, we may throw a game of dominoes in there. And
dominoes now, I feel like I could have a conversation about it. It's been so long since I played 42. All right, real quick on 42. Are you straight 42 or do you play the tricky games?
I don't play any trash. I don't do
Nello, no sevens.
Plunge, none of those. I'm a purist.
You are a purist, baby.
I'm a conservative 42 player.
I love it. Anthony Williams is always an amazing conversation, always a lot of fun. So we got that third podcast lined up now where you come back and you talk about that 1,000-place RV park. Don't think I forgot that, okay? I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Abilene People. I want to thank our guest, Anthony Williams, former mayor, and who knows, future fill in the blank. We've got to pressure him to see. And then I want to give a shout out to our ace producer, Travis Corrigan, who's always making it work over there at the Swisher board. Watch us on the CTV app. You can download that on your Roku, your Amazon Fire Stick, your major streaming providers, KTAB Plus. Download that. You can watch original programming. You can watch KTAB, KRBC programming. Soon to come, if it's not already on there, Telemundo programming. And, of course, always on bigcountryhomepage.com. I'm your host, Danny Sims. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.